Hello, and welcome to the very first geeky episode of Omen Publications from Comics to Screen. I am your host, Michael Nunneley, and I created this show to talk about two types of comics and film discussions. There are comics that take place in the same canon as a movie or TV series, like Alien, Terminator, Predator, or even Avatar, for instance. There are also comics that directly inspired movies and television shows, like the one we're talking about today. These would include stuff like The Sandman, X-Men, and Hellboy, just to name a few. Well, on From Comics to Screen, I'm going to talk about both of those, with the idea that doing this will make us appreciate these films, TV shows, and comics all the more. But you should know that I'm going to spoil the shit out of these comics, films, and television shows as I comparatively go through them. So with that out of the way, let's dive into episode 1. Today I'm going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite comic book characters and an all-time favorite animated movie of mine in the DC animated film Constantine City of Demons from 2018. As a quick side note, the name City of Demons comes from a 5-issue miniseries by Cy Spencer from 2010. But screenwriter J.M. DeMatteis took the name from this miniseries, and that is all. The film has nothing else to do with that miniseries. However, if you're interested in what would happen if doctors took Constantine's demon-infested blood and experimented on other patients by putting the blood in them, I would recommend checking out this series. Screenwriter J.M. DeMatteis set Constantine City of Demons in the DCAU as a prequel to the Justice League Dark film, which is another excellent movie. So with that, I can dig into the film a bit via the comics. Constantine City of Demons is based on the graphic novel All His Engines by Mike Carey. Yep, that's a damn good book. You want to check that out if you can. The book is also based on number 8. That's a main one in this one. And also, of course, number 11, where the infamous Newcastle event takes place. Yes, we're going to be talking about both of those. All right. The story Constantine City of Demons opens up in John's past. In the movie, during the opening scene, Chaz mentions a Dr. Huntoon having said that John was showing improvement. If Dr. Huntoon was saying that John was getting better, I have to assume that this is in 1982, towards the end of John's stay in Ravenscar. This section is based on a series of trauma-filled flashbacks that show John's time in Ravenscar in Hellblazer number 8. But let me set the stage for you with this opening scene. In Hellblazer number 8, John Constantine is in a medical hospital, having jumped from a car and is all busted up, casts on both his legs and one on his arm. While John is lying there in the hospital bed, he is tormented by the memories of the beatings and verbal abuse inflicted on him by the police, the authorities, and the other prisoners at Ravenscar Secure Facility Mental Asylum. In the movie, Ravenscar is called Ravenscar Psychiatric Institution, but 6 to 1, half dozen to the other. The memories of what went down at Newcastle to Astra broke Constantine right to his very core. John snapped in 1979 after Newcastle and was thrown into Ravenscar, and he did not come out again until 1982. Counting the months he was there in 1979, that is 4 years, folks. Dr. Huntoon believed that what happened to Astra was entirely John's fault, just like most other people. I'll be honest and say that I want to root for John, but I cannot deny that accusation, even if I see some nuances that make me understand why John would believe that what happened was an accident. John certainly did not intend for things to go down like they did, but it was a mixture of both John's arrogance and ignorance that ultimately caused it to happen. I will talk more about that when I get into Newcastle in just a bit, so stay with me. While at Ravenscar, John was under the treatment prescribed by Dr. Huntoon, which involved psychological bullying and turning up the voltage on John's electroshock treatment until he admits that Newcastle was all his fault. Dr. Huntoon took an already broken man and bullied him into seeing things his way under the guise of a psychiatric treatment. All of that going on is why when we see John for the first time in the movie at Ravenscar, John seems so ragged and broken. He was at rock bottom. Not only was he going through all of that crap with Dr. Huntoon, John was plagued with tremendous guilt and shame about Astra and a need to set things right. All right, back to the film. John wakes from the nightmare about being in Ravenscar, we just saw in the film, and it turns out he was additionally struck with a psychic message from Angela, the spirit of Los Angeles, or the Queen of Angels. And based on what happened, the Psyche's appearing, I think that message was telling John how he could attack Nergal, as that was the weapon John used in the final battle. And even thanks Angela for it. You know what? Speaking of Angela, I'd like to be a fly on the wall if John Constantine and Jack Hawksmoor, the god of cities from Stormwatch, ever compare notes on their experiences with Angela. Angela seemed to have a thing for John, and I guess I'm curious if she is flirtatious like that with everyone, like that's just who she is, or if there was just something special about John. I'm honestly not sure, although I'm inclined to say that there was something special about John. Um, Now, I do not personally know of any instances in the Hellblazer comics where these psyches appear. However, in Hellblazer 94 through 96, John takes all of the worst things about himself, Nergal's blood, all of John's baser urges and alcoholism, and dump these things into a golem made of mud that looked just like him. Then Aleister Crowley put his soul into that golem, which gave the demon Constantine sentient life. This bit in the movie does have psyches that represent all the evil stuff from Constantine, but in a very clever new way, in my opinion. My guess is that if I'm right about this, J.M. DeMatteis was playing around with this idea, and in my opinion, came up with a very Hellblazer kind of scene. But that is pure speculation based on not being able to find anything that resembled this. The next bit introduces Trisha as Chaz's daughter and not his granddaughter. That was changed in the film and for the live action series. What's more is that in Constantine City of Demons, there is no mention of Geraldine, Chaz's actual daughter from the comics. For that matter, Chaz is a bit of a jerk in all his engines. He goes to America with John to save his granddaughter Trish and cheats on his wife Renee with a woman he met in America while they were there. And as if that isn't asshole enough, Chaz even plans on leaving his wife Renee and his daughter Geraldine back in the UK to be with his new girlfriend when it looks like John might not be able to save Trisha. But in the movie, Chaz and Renee are already broken up, and he is looking to get back together with her. As Chaz comes off as a complete ass in all his engines and less of a sympathetic character, I assume that is why DeMatteis made this change. He really wanted this story to be very personal for both Chaz and John, and this actually comes up a few times in this film, but I will cross those bridges when I get there. I find it interesting that the movie mentions that it had been about 9 or 10 years since Chaz and John Constantine had seen each other, and this just happens to be the story in the animated universe where Nergal is defeated by Constantine. Here's why. In Hellblazer number 12, which takes place 10 years after Newcastle, John actually defeats Nergal with the help of his friend Richie Simpson. John leads Nergal to the edge of heaven and he gets ripped to shreds by angels, leaving nothing but a splash of Nergal's demon blood. I don't think that time frame reference was a coincidence. I mean, I suppose it could have been, but that just seems like too big of a coincidence there for me. Once Chaz shows up with Constantine in the film, his wife Renee throws a big old fit and does not want Constantine to be anywhere near her daughter. In the comics, Constantine gets the same shit, but it's Renee's mother that is angry with John when he arrives. In both cases, Chad convinces either Renee or her mother to let John try to help because the doctors haven't been able to do anything. The next scene is also pretty close to the comics, but with some roles changed. In the film, John's old friend and powerful psychic named Fennel is replaced with the nightmare nurse, who also stays to watch over Trish while John is investigating. While the nightmare nurse was channeling Barul, John asked who the demon was, knowing that the power is in the naming, and Barul says that he has many names, and John needed to be careful to choose the right one. That statement is a direct jab at comic book Constantine, who used the wrong demon's name in his conjuration spell at Newcastle. Barul then invites John to come and speak with him. In all his engines, Fennel bursts into flames and is incinerated, which is why Nightmare Nurse says that she would be dead if she was human after she had burst into flames. But before Fennel died, just like with the Nightmare Nurse, John hears from Trisha, who tells him she is chained to a bed and no one has come for her except the Nasty Man. The only other real difference here is that the address 1247 Enstrom, LA, appeared on the floorboard of Fennel's house and not on the window of the hospital. There is no mention in the comics at all about the anagram, which makes that kind of a cool addition to the movie. On their way to LA, while they're still on the plane, John reads that there are 23 more cases of the mysterious coma bug that had come in yesterday. There is nothing about any of the victims that would connect them so as to suggest a possible cause or target group. This stuff is relevant as we learn later in the film that it is Nugal who is taking the souls of the coma bug patients in order to keep his demon competitors from claiming them. The movie, however, chose to use the scene to further cement John and Chaz as having a personal stake in saving Trish. With Chaz, it's because Trish is his daughter and the only light in his life right now. With Constantine, it's about making up for what happened with Astra by saving Trish. This part of the film was quite a bit different than what we saw in the comics. And again, I think that the changes were made to make the situation with Astra and John now being asked to save another kid all the more personal. DeMatteis seems to really want to drive that point in with these changes. But at long last, let us dive into what went down at Newcastle. This, of course, comes from Hellblazer 11, as I mentioned earlier, from 1988. In the film, they talk about Chaz and John's relationship, and it's true that the two of them were close. But Chaz wasn't there at Newcastle in the comics, let alone the only person that John brought with him, like in the movie. So Chaz was also not the drummer for Mucous Membrane, the new wave band that John Constantine was in. Chaz was the roadie and the driver. Also, it was Gary Lester and John that started the band and not Chaz and John. I think it was important in the film to establish Chaz's long history with John, especially since their friendship was the card Chaz was playing to get John to save Trish. But back to Newcastle and Hellblazer 11, because this whole section I am about to describe is missing from the Newcastle narrative in the film. The folks that were actually there at Newcastle were Frank, Judith, Anne-Marie, who had a mad crush on John, Richie Simpson, Gary Lester, Ray, and Ben. And they had all become friends because of their mutual interest in the occult, and John was kind of their de facto leader. One night, Mucous Membrane got a gig at a place called the Casanova Club, owned by a shady sex and drug magician named Alex Loeb. But when they played there, Alex Loeb invited them down to his chapel in the basement to party and dabble in some magic together. The band agreed and went downstairs, but Constantine was horrified to find that Alex Loeb was using his daughter Astra in his spells and even touching her inappropriately. So they left, but John and Gary and their occult friends would come back to investigate later under the guise that John and Gary were there to collect their percentage of the door for playing the gig. When they came back to the club the next day, they had to break into the Casanova Club to get out of the rain. Once they were inside, they started looking around. Ray picked up a strange energy, and Anne-Marie sensed that there's something awful had happened there. Then Ben heard weird sounds and smelled something horrid coming from the basement. John led them down the stairs only to find a bloodbath. 4 different bodies and heads that seemed to have just been torn limb from limb. It was just a pile of horror and freshly mutilated corpses. Right about then, they heard screaming upstairs and decided no matter what was going on upstairs, it was better than staying downstairs with the bodies, or at least what was left of them. When they head upstairs, they find young Astra Logue in a severely traumatized state, dancing to the apparently recorded sounds of the slaughter they had just saw the aftermath of down below. They shut off the record, playing the sounds of tearing flesh and breaking bone amidst screams and begging, and Astra finally stops dancing. John hypnotizes Astra to find out what had happened to her, and she tells him that her father, Alex, had repeatedly raped her and even brought her into his sex magic sessions to watch their orgies, and she was forced to touch them while they did it. To make it even worse, her father would take pictures of her and his friends. Put quite simply, she had told him time and time again that she did not like it and did not want to do it. And now enough was enough and she couldn't take it anymore. So Astra imagined the most terrible thing she could, the Norful thing. The Norful thing is part giant dog and part monkey, but all turned inside out with a man's penis. She imagined this terrible and hideous creature to, in Astra's words, help her, and help her it did. The Norful thing then slaughtered her father, Alex Logue, and his friends. Everyone except for her, in fact, giving us the last bit of the story explaining the bodies they found in the basement. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are only a possible 4 bodies down in the basement in Alex Logue's chapel. There was not a club full of people upstairs for the Norful thing to kill too. In that respect, the film actually added more death and carnage. It should also be noted that the film leaves out the rape and molestation of Astra by Alex Logue and his friends and changes the background of Alex Logue to be that of Alex actually being John's mentor and not just the owner of the Casanova Club. The film also makes no mention of the Norfolk thing and only brings up John Constantine's conjuring of Nergal to, in Renee's words, kill a demon like Alex Logue. Now, I think that to say a human is demon-like and needs to be taken out, and to actually need to take out a demon or whatever that Norfolk thing was, are on two entirely different levels. It's apples and oranges. The only thing I can think of is that J.M. DeMatteis wanted to make John's relationship with Nergal a major plot point for the film without having to go through everything that went down at Newcastle in the comics. But speaking of all his engines, let's get back to how it went down in the comics, and I think you'll see what I mean. Unfortunately, once all of the bad people were dead, the Norfolk thing that was conjured by Astra did not go away. It was still a very real threat. John figured that the best way to get rid of a demon that clearly outmatched them was to summon another demon even more powerful than that demon to take him out. That part of the movie they actually got right, save for the Norfolk thing. Almost the entire group was against the plan, and with good reason. Summoning a demon is never a good idea, but this is not a lesson John Constantine would ever learn that I know of. I mean, he spent most of his life bartering his soul and making deals with demons and getting demons to fight each other. Hell, you'll note that that's even how he deals with Nergal's demands at Mictlantecuhtli in this film. But before John could make the decision to go through with the conjuring ritual, everyone heard Ben screaming from the basement. When they all ran back down there to see what was wrong, they found the Norfolk thing raping Ben. And I mean, Norfolk thing had Ben's jeans ripped open in the back, had him bent over a table, and was balls deep in his ass. If demons had balls, anyway. Well, this seems extreme, and it is. When I consider the source of the demon being a little girl that was raped by her father repeatedly, and that with all of the grotesque and animal-like energy of the Norfolk thing, it very distinctly had a man's penis, then to me it paints the scene in a different light. Number one, we know that Alex Rogue raped Astra, and it is possible that he once raped Astra just like the Norfolk thing was raping Ben. In my head, I imagine even if it was not necessarily on a conscious level, maybe Astra wished that her father would suffer what she had been going through at his hands, and the Norfolk thing was living out that unconscious fantasy indiscriminately. That is pure speculation, but that is just how I interpret the story. Anyway, the rest of John Constantine's little circle managed to pull poor Ben away from the Norfolk thing after Frank blasts it with a shotgun. But after seeing that and rescuing Ben, John doesn't care if the rest of the group doesn't like the idea. He's going to do the ritual. John gave everybody their little jobs, mostly to keep them busy, and they all did them. But John specifically had Anne-Marie go upstairs with Astra and sit inside a protective circle that he had up there to protect them. Soon, everything was set up exactly the way the Grimorium Verum John had studied told him to do it. In fact, he and Judith even prepared for the summoning with tantric sex. John and his friends stepped inside the magic circle John made downstairs. He cuts himself with a magic knife and says the magic words. I conjure thee, appear in human form, fair and agreeable, without noise or inconvenience, in order to obey my will. But nothing happens. So he tries again, changing the words a little and calling out the demon by name, Sagatana. But nothing seems to be happening. However, something was happening upstairs to Anne-Marie and Astra. The demon, who we find out is Nergal, appeared to Anne-Marie as John Constantine pleading for her to step out of the magic circle and have sex with him. Being in love with John and unaware that this was not him, Anne-Marie stepped forward and embraced him. And when she did, the demon exploded with orgasmic acid that covered her and began to eat away at her flesh. But even then, she was still under the demon's spell. And when he told her that she was now spoiled and needed to get herself to a nunnery, she dove out the window and killed herself, thus leaving Astra alone with the demon. Now, as you can tell, this was a pretty bad night with some pretty terrible things that happened, and maybe a bit of justice in the case of Alex Logue, if I'm honest. But right about here is where things truly go on and on south of heaven. That is a Slayer reference for you non-metalheads out there. The next thing you know, Astra comes downstairs, but it is not Astra. Nergal, the demon that came in Constantine's conjuring, has possessed young Astra. Then John and his friend watched as Nergal and Astra's body called the Norfolk thing to her and then ripped it to shreds. John immediately realizes what has happened and attempts to command the demon by calling it out by name, Sagatana. And here's where Constantine's true ignorance about what he was doing really flips the script on him. The demon is not Sagatana, but has chosen to obey Constantine's impotent antique magic as he willed it. He appeared before Constantine in human form, fair and unagreeable, without noise or inconvenience, by possessing Astra. Then, as Constantine commanded him with his intent, the demon dispatched the Norfolk thing. But this was all without obligation on the demon's part. John used shitty magic and didn't even properly name or describe the demon he was summoning. But Constantine did describe the different demon's character, and that was the one who came. Despite this, when John demanded that the demon leave Astra, the demon chose to do so. Astra then vomited up this putrid, fleshy mass, and they grew into this hideous form of faces and body parts from all manner of creatures, from a housefly to what seems like a dinosaur and humans. But as Nergal had done the things Constantine asked, the demon was owed some type of compensation, and he chose to take Astra to hell to pay that debt. I think this is what happens in the film, but without words to explain it. Nergal slaughters everyone, but then stops, grabs Astra, and tossed her into hell, just like he was taking the payment that he was owed. In Hellblazer number 11, John begs for Nergal to take his soul instead, since it was his mistake. But the demon informs him that John's soul already belongs to him, but that while John could not take Astra's place, John was welcome to accompany Astra to hell. John agrees to go with her and walks with Astra hand in hand into hell. Of course, he has to try to get out of all this, and he attempts to use a holy artifact called the Blasting Wand. But the wand quickly turns into a snake, and a demon's voice can be suddenly heard saying, "Weep now, children. Rant and tear your hair. Remember, hell is your eventual home. Consider this a taste of things to come." Back on this plane, the rest of the group has set the Casanova Club on fire because they believe that John Constantine was not going to come back from hell. This real-life occurrence had an effect on John and Astra's experience in hell as the place started to rumble when the building was set on fire. John held tight to Astra's hand as he found himself once again in the Casanova Club that was burning. John ran out the front door, still holding Astra's hand, but it turned out that all he had was her hand. He had been holding on to Astra's severed arm. Personally, while the movie does a fine job describing what went down in Newcastle, I prefer how it went down in the comics. I like the idea of Astra summoning the Norfolk thing and basically snapping because of what her father put her through. Number one, it gives Astra some agency. And number two, I think that it was the power of her level of emotion built up from years of sexual abuse that powered her wish to summon Norfolk thing on a subconscious level. I don't know. I guess I appreciate the power that such strong emotional energy can have in the spiritual realm. And now that you know what happened in Newcastle and how it compared to what DeMatteis wrote in City of Demons, I'd love to hear your thoughts as to which version you prefer, if knowing this changes your perspective of the movie's interpretation. All right, so the next scene is where Chaz and John make their way to the address that John was given by the Nightmare Nurse, or Fennel in the comics, when they burst into flames. The scene is almost exactly what happens in All His Engines, down to John snooping around to the pool of liquefying corpses and everything. In All His Engines and in City of Demons, Barul has an operation in LA, bringing hell to earth a little bit at a time, and he wants John Constantine to take out his competitors. What is definitely better in the film is the walk through what all Mr. Barul is doing in his efforts to bring a little bit of hell to earth at a time. I loved what amounts to a demon nightclub where humans are being mutilated and tortured. And the film stuff with tossing people into the film and suddenly they appear as part of the movie was very Last Action Hero cool. But the reason this was so cool is because in All of His Engines, we only get to see all of one panel of one person getting skinned alive. So this elaborate scene was way, way better. But back to All His Engines. Barul has 9 demons. Chaleb, Mahonin, Dekarabia, Amaimon, and his sister Quedbas, the Scald Seraphim, Nabaz, Miel, and Baphomet, that he wants Constantine to eliminate. And if he does take them out, then Barul will give Trish back. Mr. Barul knows that Constantine is a tricky fucker and he needed some incentive to keep John on track, and so he says that he is keeping Trish in a cell in his heart. quite literally right about the left ventricle, as a guarantee of John's good conduct. So if Constantine tries to kill him, John will really be killing Trish Chu, and so John reluctantly agrees. In the movie, it is John giving the irate Chaz the warning about attacking Mr. Barul while Trish is inside his heart. But Chaz takes a swing at Barul and is teleported away. In City of Demons, Chaz comes out with a sword, but it's pretty damn close. But let's pause right there for just a second. I'd like to talk about that exchange between John and Mr. Barul and a bit more about Hellblazer number 8, which I think was an influence on that scene. In Hellblazer number 8, Nergal visits John in the hospital while he's all busted up from jumping from the new moving car and tells him that John has no choice but to join his team of horrorists. And you'll note that in Constantine City of Demons, Nergal forces John into similar agreement of working for him without choice because Nergal needed someone of John's skill set out in the field. Granted, the exact job of both situations from Hellblazer 8 and Constantine City of Demons are not the same. But substitute one assignment for the other and you basically have the same pitch. So here is John once again up to his neck in shit with another demon. But this time his association with Mr. Barul has attracted the attention of one of the very demons that Mr. Barul wanted Constantine to dispatch. And one of Barul's competitors has sent a pack of demon dogs after Chaz and John as they left Mr. Barul's house. Of course, Angela, the spirit of Los Angeles, shows up in a stranger's body and rescues John and Chaz because even though she is double-crossing them, she still needs John to complete Mr. Barul's task as it eliminates 5 demons. But a funny and yet revealing thing happened while they are still in John's rented car being chased by the demon dogs. Chaz naively asks if John can't just magic them away or something. And John responds with, "Well, who do you think I am, Benedict Bloody Cumberbatch?" Which is an obvious reference to Cumberbatch's MCU character, Doctor Strange. And that means, although this kind of slipped by me the first couple of times I watched it, that the MCU actually exists in the DCAU. Check that out. There's another scene where John goes back to see Mr. Barul, and Barul reveals that he is actually Nergal, who in the comics is the Archduke of Mendacity, or Lies if you prefer. This big reveal of Nergal being the one at the center of everything that's been happening again builds more animosity between Constantine and Nergal. As a writer, I see this as building tension before the big fight. But I should say that while I like the change, this bit about Barul really being Nergal was not in the comics and was only in this film. However, I think that this big reveal from John's past is similar to all his engines in that Mictlantecutli is revealed to be the same god that appeared to John as a boy and scared the crap out of him. Then again, John saw Mictlantecutli as a teen looking in on him and Chaz, and now as an adult when John summons the Aztec god of death to deal with the demons. John legitimately looks terrified in the comics when he recognizes Mictlantecutli, an old fear locked away from his childhood springing to life. Now, John plays it pretty cool in the film when Nergal reveals himself, but as this movie has shown up to this point, anything involving Newcastle is going to be a bit of a trigger for John. But speaking of that meeting with Mictlantecutli, John does go to what appears to be a butcher in the comics. In the film, it looks like he's gone to a slaughterhouse chilling room based on the stage of the hanging beef. But it's close. There are people there. The man who seems to be the butcher doesn't want to let John in at first. I got the impression that to this man and the people there, the place John was asking to go to and the person he was asking to speak to were holy. They were sacred to them. And not just anybody could go into this place or talk to their god. The butcher questions John about whether he really believes in Mictlantecutli. For some reason, when Chaz gets frustrated and starts a fight by hitting the guy, the butcher tells John that Chaz spilling blood in that ground was a sign and he lets John pass. Once inside and talking to Mictlantecutli, John points out that Mictlantecutli is basically scraping by to survive as there are not enough followers or tribute to him any longer. Then John lays it on really thick by telling Mictlantecutli that now he has all of these demons coming up into his territory and taking Mictlantecutli's action. Now, the comic cuts away here and shows John walking away from the temple saying that it's all going down tomorrow night. Meanwhile, John makes arrangements for Mclantacutli, Chaleb, Mahonin, Decorabia, Amamon and his sister Quedbes, the Scald Seraphim, Nabaz, Miel, and Baphomet, the enemies of Mr. Barol that Constantine is supposed to take out, to all meet him at the old broken down church, as he figured it would be neutral ground for them to, and none of them would want to claim it. Later, when John and Chaz pull up to the unconsecrated church, Chaz is wondering why John picked a church for this meeting of demons and an Aztec god. John points out that the church is unconsecrated, otherwise he himself would have a hard time stepping foot on the church grounds. This is because in Hellblazer number 8, Nergal straight IV'd his Archduke demon blood right into John Constantine's veins in order to heal him so that John could work for him. A demand which John himself made, in fact. But from that point onward, John Constantine has Nergal's demon blood coursing through his veins. But back to the church in the comics. Before the demons in Mclantacutli arrive, Chaz dumps holy water all around the old church in a circle to keep the demons inside, just like you see in the film. The demons arrive first and threaten John Constantine, just like in the movie, practically down to the letter. Mclantacutli arrived at the church too and then started eliminating the competition just as he and Constantine agreed. The demons all tried to run but could not get past the holy water. Contrarily, Mclantacutli didn't care about the blessings or saints, so it was just water to him. The fight between Mclantacutli and the other 5 demons, right down to John picking the black market holy water to prevent the other demons from leaving the grounds until Mclantacutli could finish him off, is pretty close to how things went down in all his engines. But it did not end the same way, in large part because there is no Angela in all his engines. Mclantacutli took out the other demons without issue in the comics. I mean, he's a fucking death god. But when Mclantacutli is done, John tells him that there is more competition out there in Hollywood, even bigger than the ones he just dispatched. And Mclantacutli replies chillingly, "I know about him, but he's not in Hollywood. He is here." And as he is speaking the words, Barul appear in the background. Barul makes a deal to give Mclantacutli 1 soul for every 10 that Barul takes, and Mclantacutli says that was acceptable. When John reminds Barul that he and Barul had a deal, Barul calmly says that they both know he wasn't going to keep it, which is actually a very Nergal thing to say, as he is the Archduke of Lies. Barul even involves Constantine in his and Mclantacutli's new adventure by saying that John would work as a go-between in their partnership. And then, of course, Barul reminds John with a big old backhand that Trish is in his heart, and as long as John works for him, then Trish stays alive. But there is an unspoken twisting knife in that deal. The longer Trish is out of her body, the more of it that shuts down. Eventually, even if Trish was put back in her body, she would be a vegetable. So John knows his time is short, but Chaz and his new girlfriend just give up after this, blame John and walk away. In both comics and the film, John Constantine goes and gets drunk as hell after this, and Constantine ends up in jail. But in the comic, John Constantine reminds Mclantacutli that he is a death god, and that a death god doesn't prey on his people or trade them like baseball cards like he has done making a deal with Nergal. A death god takes souls to wherever they are going over the river. But Mclantacutli is just sitting there, skimming off the cream while Barul uses the souls to furnish his custom-built infernos. John also asks that if Mclantacutli can separate someone's soul from their body, can he also put them back together? Because in the comic, getting Mclantacutli to put Trish's body and soul back together is how John tricks Barul when Barul plays the trump card of killing Trish if John doesn't stay in line. Barul was so occupied with what was going on in LA, he basically lost track of everyone he had in this coma state, namely those back in London where Trish's body was. Just when Barul thought that he had the upper hand, Mclantacutli bursts through his chest and kills him, releasing Trish and all the other coma bug patients. Then Constantine turns his sights on Mclantacutli, who decides that he is keeping Trish's soul. John whips out Trish's teddy bear, but this time the bear has a lock of hair on it, which John claims to belong to Trisha, which ends up being a fetish. And a fetish is something attached to a soul. If John burns the hair, Trisha's soul burns, and John starts to burn the hair as a threat to Mclantacutli, and Mclantacutli flees, leaving Trish in her body. The movie ends a bit differently, as you know. John threatens to bring hell itself up as a bluff to Nergal, and Nergal calls him on it. After calling the Psyches Angela provided on Nergal, Constantine uses the Camdever curse to defeat Nergal. This curse means that Renee and Trish will no longer remember Chaz, and that Chaz will no longer remember John. Trish was saved, but at great cost to multiple lives. This is actually one of my favorite parts of the movie because it shows that magic isn't just waving a wand or saying the right words. It has great costs, and I really appreciate that. I think that if magic is real, then it has to be a lot like this. I've reached my final thoughts and closing section of the episode. Now, Constantine's City of Demons is darker than the live action series, and honestly, I'm glad for that. But you may not know this, but saying that it is darker than the live action series is actually saying something. There are episodes of that former Arrowverse series that are right out of the Vertigo comics. Plus, in my opinion, the DCAU film Constantine's City of Demons feels more like the comics than most DC animated films. DeMatteis nailed that Vertigo feel, and I think that a big part of that Vertigo feel was that bittersweet ending. But that is about it for my first Comics to Screen episode. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to hang out with me. And additionally, I hope that I've given you some info that will help you appreciate the comics and the film all the more. I'll see you next time. But until then, keep on geeking.